Picture this. It's a Friday afternoon.
Oh, the best time of the week.
Right. You're wrapping up your work week. Maybe you're sitting at your desk, or, maybe you're on the train commuting home.
Yeah, just totally zoned out.
Exactly. And you pull out your phone, fully expecting the usual barrage of emails or text messages or news alerts.
Just standard digital noise.
Right. But instead, you see a push notification pop up on your lock screen. It's just a simple, unassuming little banner, and it reads, "Need someone to have dinner with tonight."
See, that is the kind of notification that makes you, actually pause and stare at your screen for a second.
It really is. Because your immediate instinct is to categorize it. You think, okay, my phone is definitely listening to me.
Right. We all think that.
Like maybe this is a dating app trying a weird new angle.
Or some sort of digital therapy platform checking in on you.
Yeah. Or maybe it's a new feature on a social network, trying to get you to meet up with local community groups or something.
But the thing is, it's none of those things.
None of them. It is simply a platform offering you another human being.
Yeah.
Someone you can literally hire right from your phone to sit across from you at a restaurant.
Or to walk through a city with you.
Right. Or to be your +1 to an event so you don't have to walk into a crowded room alone. Or honestly, just to listen while you talk.
It's just a human being you can hire to be present.
Which triggers an incredibly visceral reaction for most people.
Oh, absolutely. There's this immediate recoil, right? This feeling of, wait, is society really at a point where we have to put a price tag on someone just sitting across from us?
Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone.
Glad you're here.
Today, we are exploring a stack of fascinating market research we've been analyzing. The source material is a document titled rent-a-companion.txt.
It is a wild read.
It really is. Our mission today is to explore the absolute frontier where human connection meets the free market.
We are looking at what happens when human presence is commodified, packaged and sold as a service.
If you're an American entrepreneur, or even just a typical consumer looking at that Friday afternoon notification, your very first reaction is probably going to be a highly skeptical, who on earth would actually pay for that?
Right. It feels deeply counterintuitive to the way we've always structured our social lives.
Because we think of friendship as organic. We think of connection as something that happens naturally outside the realm of commerce.
I mean, it feels almost dystopian to most of us.
Yeah, you hear rent a friend, and it sounds like the premise of a bleak sci-fi movie where everyone is isolated in cods.
But the research we're looking at brilliantly points out that dismissing it as dystopian is actually dodging the real issue.
How so?
Well, the much more profound and frankly much more challenging question this text forces us to ask is this.
Okay, lay it on me.
What happens when loneliness becomes something people are willing to budget for?
Wow.
Right, because the moment that psychological shift occurs in a population, companionship completely stops being just a social phenomenon.
It crosses a hard line.
Exactly. It becomes an industry. It becomes a scalable business.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the reality is this isn't science fiction. This is already happening.
It is very real.
And to understand where the U.S. market is potentially heading, the research points us directly to the blueprint that already exists, which is Japan.
Japan is absolutely the proving ground for this entire concept.
Right.
They have essentially built the beta version of the human connection industry over the last decade.
The documentation highlights a specific service in Japan called Frenta, and the scope of what they offer is mind-blowing to an American sensibility.
It really is.
On these platforms, people are explicitly connecting to rent out friends. But it goes way beyond just finding a buddy to grab a drink with.
Oh, way beyond.
You can rent older men to dispense life advice. You can rent older women. You can rent people to act as your family members for highly specific, high-stress situations.
Yeah, there are agencies offering professional staff whose entire job description is to temporarily step into your life and play a role.
Like what kind of roles?
Well, you see people hiring fake parents to meet their fiancé's parents because they're estranged from their real families.
That is wild.
Or you see people hiring someone to act as their boss to go apologize to a landlord on their behalf. The utility of it is staggering.
But the immediate pushback I have when reading about the Japanese model is that Japanese culture and American culture view social obligation very differently.
So, absolutely.
In the West, authenticity is our golden calf.
Yeah.
We want everything to be real.
Right.
So when we hear rent a friend, it sounds highly transactional, pathetic, and honestly, a bit uncomfortable. We just assume the person hiring the friend is desperate.
And that is the fundamental misunderstanding that will cause American founders to fail in this space.
Really?
Yes, we look at the Japanese model and we misidentify the product. The core distinction we have to make, and this changes everything about how you build this business in the West,
Right.
is that this is not the business of renting friends. That is a terrible way to market it.
Then what is it?
It is the business of selling access to human presence.
That distinction really unlocked the whole concept for me. When I was reading through the use cases, it hit me.
Yeah.
Think about the early days of ride sharing. It's like Uber, but instead of hiring a car to physically get you across town from point A to point B, because walking is too far,
Right.
you're hiring a social co-pilot to get you through the emotional friction of an intimidating room.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize it.
Yeah.
You aren't buying a lifelong bond. You are buying a highly targeted solution to a momentary problem.
Exactly.
The customer who opens that app isn't necessarily saying, I am deeply chronically lonely, my life is a mess, and I need a best friend.
No, they're saying, I have to attend my ex-colleague's wedding, I don't have a date, and I do not want to endure the pitying looks of sitting alone at table number 12.
Exactly. Or, I just moved to Chicago for a new tech job. I haven't unpacked my boxes. I don't know a single soul in this time zone.
Right.
And I just want someone to walk through the West Loop with me on a Sunday afternoon so I don't feel like a ghost.
Or even more simply, I am exhausted from staring at my apartment walls, but I don't have the energy to go out and try to organically spark up a conversation with a stranger at a bar.
Exactly. The product isn't the person you're hiring. The product is the reduction of friction around being alone.
The reduction of friction. If you market it to an American audience as rent a friend, you immediately hit a wall of cultural resistance.
Because the buyer feels a sense of shame.
Exactly. But if you position it as companionship on demand, or, someone to do life with when you need it, suddenly you aren't selling desperation.
No, you are selling a premium lifestyle solution. You are selling convenience.
Much like having your groceries delivered or hiring a personal trainer.
And the market for that convenience is vastly larger than people realize. Because when we strip away the stigma of the word lonely and look at the actual data of how Americans are living in 2026,
the picture is incredibly stark. Let's pull up those numbers.
Yeah.
Because this is where the reality check hits hard for anyone doubting the viability of this market.
yeah, let's look at the stats.
The research cites the 2025 American Psychological Association's Stress in America survey. They found that half of U.S. adults reported lacking companionship, feeling left out, or feeling isolated at least some of the time.
Half of the entire adult population.
Half.
What's fascinating here is how consistent that data is across different research bodies. The text also brings in Pew Research Center data, which found that about 1 in 6 American adults say they feel lonely or isolated all or most of the time.
1 in 6. That is massive.
We are talking about tens of millions of people who are essentially functioning in a perpetual state of social deficit.
If you're listening to this on your commute right now, or maybe you're working from home, look around. Think about the demographics.
It's not who you think.
We often picture chronic loneliness as an affliction of the elderly, right?
Yep.
The widow living alone in the suburbs. But the Pew data shows something that completely upends that stereotype.
Yeah, this part blew my mind.
Adults under 50 are actually more likely than older adults to report frequent loneliness.
We really need to pause on that point because it is the linchpin of the entire business case.
Go on.
The most socially isolated demographic is the exact same demographic that is most comfortable with app-based on-demand services.
But wait, I have to challenge that a bit. How is it that the demographic that grew up with the internet, the demographic that is constantly on social media, text threads, Discord servers, and Slack channels,
Yeah.
how are they the most isolated? Shouldn't technology have solved this for them?
It's the paradox of hyperconnectivity. The technology didn't solve the friction of human connection, it just allowed us to bypass it entirely. We substituted physical presence for parasocial relationships and digital text. We have an entire generation of young adults who are working remotely, living in transient cities where they don't know their neighbors, and consuming endless content about other people's lives.
So they see people, but they aren't with people.
Exactly. They have thousands of data points of connection, but zero actual presence. And humans are biologically hardwired to require physical proximity to other humans to regulate our nervous systems.
So the screen time is basically empty calories. You feel full for a minute, but you're starving for actual nutrition.
That's a great way to put it. So when we look at this from an entrepreneurial lens, you aren't trying to sell ice to Eskimos. You are looking at a market where half the country is fundamentally starving for the exact product you are offering.
But just because a market is starving doesn't mean you can successfully run a restaurant.
True. Very true.
I mean, identifying a massive societal problem is one thing, but actually constructing a functional, profitable company around the abstract concept of human connection is entirely different.
It's incredibly difficult.
How do you take the nebulous idea of presence and turn it into a balance sheet?
The research breaks this down into 4 very distinct business models. And if you are a founder entering this space, you essentially have to choose one of these paths.
Okay, let's walk through them.
They act as stepping stones of complexity, starting with the most basic, the low-cost, casual companion model.
This is model 1, the pure marketplace. It's exactly what most people pictured when we talked about that push notification earlier.
Right, the app experience.
The customer opens an app, they see a grid of faces, they scroll through profiles, they filter by hobbies or age, they choose a companion, pick a 2-hour time slot, and pay an hourly rate.
Just a standard transaction.
You're hiring someone for basic conversation, going for a walk, maybe grabbing a coffee.
And in this model, the company acts solely as the middleman. They are the digital town square. They take a 20% or 30% platform fee for facilitating the match and handling the payment processing.
So from a startup capital perspective, this is incredibly attractive. The text notes this is by far the cheapest way to enter the market.
Because you have practically zero overhead. You don't employ the companions directly, so there's no payroll tax or benefits.
You just build a website, code a scheduling widget, set up a Stripe account for payments, run some automated background checks, get a basic insurance policy, and start recruiting gig workers.
You could theoretically launch the MVP of this for a few $1,000s.
But hold on, if I'm a founder, that sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it is.
If I'm just playing matchmaker for strangers on an app for $30 an hour, aren't I just building a ticking time bomb for trust and safety?
You are.
I mean, we've all seen the horror stories from ride-sharing apps or short-term rentals. When unvetted human beings are put into unmonitored physical spaces, things go wrong. Someone gets harassed, someone gets scammed, someone gets hurt.
And you've just identified the critical vulnerability that destroys almost every Model 1 startup.
I knew it.
A marketplace is the hardest version of this business to sustain because the trust deficit is astronomically high. The moment one interaction goes south, your brand is permanently associated with danger.
And nobody is going to use a dangerous companionship app.
Exactly. And that the sheer terror of unmanaged risk is what necessitates the evolution into Model 2.
Which the text calls the Managed Companion Agency. So how does shifting to an agency model actually fix the trust deficit of the marketplace?
By entirely removing the Wild West element. In a managed agency, the company doesn't just provide a platform for anyone to sign up. They take total control of the supply side.
So they're hands-on.
Very. They actively recruit, they conduct intense in-person interviews, they provide behavioral training, and they manage the schedules of the companions directly.
So the marketing pitch completely changes. You're not saying to the customer, here's a list of random people nearby who want to hang out.
Right.
You're saying we, as a brand, offer verified, trained, safe companions. We vouch for every single person we send to you.
Yes. The customer is no longer rolling the dice on a user-generated profile. They are buying a service directly from a trusted corporate entity.
That makes a lot more sense.
This model also allows the business to carve out highly specialized, highly lucrative niches. The text specifically mentions services tailored for seniors.
Oh, that makes total sense. If I'm a working professional in my 40s and my 75-year-old mother lives 3 states away, I am riddled with guilt that she is sitting alone in her house all day.
It's a huge pain point for people.
And I am definitely not going to hire a random gig worker from an app to go sit with her. But I absolutely would pay a premium to a bonded, insured, tightly managed agency to send a vetted professional to play chess with her twice a week.
But look at what happens to your startup costs the moment you pivot to that model.
They explode.
They absolutely explode. You aren't just paying for software hosting anymore. You have massive recruitment costs. You have to develop and implement formal training programs.
Right.
You are likely dealing with complex contractor management or even W-2 employee payroll. Your insurance premiums skyrocket because you are promising a higher standard of care. You are moving firmly into the tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get the doors open.
So you solve the trust problem, but you murder your profit margins.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, which is a perfect segue into Model 3. Because If you have to spend that much money ensuring quality, you might as well charge top dollar for it.
You have to.
The text calls this the premium concierge. And I have to admit, this completely reframes the whole concept for me.
It really elevates the entire premise out of the realm of basic social work and into high-end hospitality.
Think about this scenario. You have a wealthy executive visiting New York City for a week. They have a free weekend, but they don't want a standard guy with a megaphone giving them a historical walking tour.
Right, they want something tailored.
They certainly aren't looking for a dating service because they are happily married.
Yeah.
They just want a sophisticated, personable, highly cultured individual to accompany them for the afternoon.
Someone who sits into their lifestyle seamlessly.
Exactly. Someone who knows the maitre d' at the right restaurant, who can walk through a Chelsea art gallery and actually discuss the pieces, or who can sit in a luxury suite at a Knicks game and offer engaging, intelligent conversation.
Notice how the competitive landscape entirely shifts the moment you adopt the premium concierge model. You are no longer competing with cheap gig economy apps.
You're not competing with basic boredom.
You have entered the experience economy. You are competing with luxury travel agents and high-end concierges.
And the economic shift with it. You aren't charging $30 an hour, you're charging $200 an hour, or $1,500 for a day rate.
But the trade-off is brutal. The expectations scale exponentially with the price tag.
Well, of course.
If a customer is paying $1,500 for a companion, that companion cannot have an off day. They cannot be checking their phone. The customer expects flawless professional behavior, total discretion, punctuality, and an encyclopedic knowledge of the city.
Finding individuals who possess both extreme emotional intelligence and high society polish has got to be incredibly difficult.
It is, which makes scaling this model almost impossible. It stays a boutique business.
It's like the difference between running a fast casual franchise and a Michelin star restaurant. The core product is still a meal, or in this case, human presence, but the delivery and the expectations change the entire molecular structure of the business.
Which brings us to the holy grail of modern business architecture, Model 4, the model that every venture capitalist wants to see, companionship as a subscription.
Because the fundamental flaw in models 1, 2, and 3 is that you have to convince the customer to open their wallet every single time they want the service.
Exactly. Customer acquisition is the most expensive part of any business.
Right.
If you spend $50 in marketing to acquire a lonely customer and they book one session, you might barely break even. The challenge of this industry is not convincing a lonely person to try you once. It is giving them a compelling structural reason to integrate your service into their permanent routine.
But how do you subscribe to a person? I mean, I understand subscribing to a gym or a streaming service, but how does a companionship subscription actually function in the real world?
The research outlines a fascinating hypothetical package. Imagine a tier-based system. You pay, say, $300 a month. That monthly fee guarantees you 4 hours of companionship credits.
Okay, simple enough.
But more importantly, it gives you priority booking rights, so if it's Valentine's Day or a busy Friday night, you are guaranteed to get a companion while non-subscribers are locked out.
That's clever. You're monetizing the fear of missing out on connection.
Furthermore, the subscription allows you to request your preferred companion every time. It builds continuity. It's not a new stranger every week, it's Sarah, who already knows you hate small talk and prefer walking through botanical gardens.
Oh, that changes everything.
It might offer discounted hourly rates if you need someone for a longer specific event, like a weekend wedding. And crucially, it might include digital perks.
Like what?
Maybe you get unlimited text messaging with your companion between physical meetups, or video chats if you're traveling for work and just want a familiar face to talk to from your hotel room.
That is absolutely brilliant because it completely rewrites the financial foundation of the company. In the marketplace model, you only earn money when a customer actively decides to overcome their inertia and make a transaction.
Right.
But with a subscription, you earn money when a customer simply forgets to cancel. You earn on retention rather than transaction.
It creates predictable, recurring revenue. But, and this is a massive looming caveat.
There's always a caveat.
Always. Executing any of these four models, whether it's the app, the agency, the concierge, or the subscription, it brings us face to face with the brutal operational reality of the business.
We need to dive deep into that reality because from the outside, looking at a spreadsheet of subscription revenue, this seems like an absolute cash cow.
It looks so easy on paper.
It really does. Think about it. There is no physical restaurant to build out. There is no warehouse to lease in the industrial district. You aren't buying shipping containers full of microchips from overseas. You don't have manufacturing equipment breaking down. Your entire inventory is just people.
And believing that is a competitive advantage is the most dangerous assumption a founder could possibly make.
Really?
Yes, because as the text ruthlessly points out, people are the inventory, and human inventory is the most expensive, volatile, and complex inventory on planet Earth.
I mean, managing human inventory isn't like storing iPhones in a warehouse where they just sit perfectly still in a box.
Not at all.
It's like trying to run a volatile power grid where the batteries can randomly decide they're depressed, or get into a fender bender on the way to the customer, or decide they actually hate the customer and want to quit mid-session.
Exactly. Let's break down these hidden costs of human inventory, starting with the absolute baseline: screening and insurance.
Okay, screening. If you are building a business that facilitates in-person meetings between two strangers behind closed doors, or even in a public park, your screening process cannot be handled like a standard gig economy delivery app.
No, you aren't dropping off a lukewarm burrito on a porch. You are putting two emotional, unpredictable human beings in a room together.
So a basic automated criminal background check isn't going to cut it?
Not even close. Identity verification is paramount, obviously, but you also need reference checks, behavioral interviews, and psychological profiling.
Psychological profiling.
Yes, you have to screen for empathy, for boundaries, for de-escalation skills. If a customer starts crying during a dinner, how does the companion react? That level of vetting requires highly paid human HR professionals, not just a software algorithm.
And even if you screen perfectly, you still have to deal with the insurance labyrinth. I was trying to wrap my head around this while reading the research. How do you even underwrite the risk of a bad date?
It is an underwriter's worst nightmare.
What is the liability if a customer claims the companion caused them severe emotional harm because they were dismissive?
Exactly. The company obviously needs general liability insurance. What if they go for a walk in the park and the companion accidentally drops the customer's expensive camera?
Or what if the companion is driving the customer and they get into a physical accident?
Yes, all of that. But the real nightmare is professional liability.
Right, because what exactly are you promising?
Exactly. If your marketing copy claims your companions are empathetic, trained listeners who will help you through tough times, does that border on therapeutic claims?
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that.
If a customer has a mental breakdown after a session, can they sue you for malpractice? Furthermore, if the company goes with Model 2 and hires these companions as W-2 employees rather than 999 contractors, suddenly you are dealing with workers' compensation.
And if your employee is harassed by a customer, the company is liable for not providing a safe workplace.
The insurance requirements fluctuate wildly depending on the exact wording on your website.
Which brings us to the legal minefield of classification. I was genuinely surprised by this section of the text. I kept wondering, why is the simple word companion such a legal hazard? It seems like such a soft, innocent, generic term. I use it to describe my dog.
It seems innocent until you open the Federal Employment Law rulebook. The text explains that the Department of Labor actually has very specific, heavily litigated definitions for companionship services. This is particularly true when those services are provided to elderly individuals or people with illnesses, injuries, or disabilities.
So let me get this straight. If my startup just slaps the phrase, "We offer companion services" on our homepage, I can't just assume one set of rules covers everything from a 25-year-old wanting a wingman at a bar to an 85-year-old wanting someone to play Scrabble with at a retirement home.
Precisely. The moment your service edges toward that 85-year-old, the regulatory picture instantly changes. Federal law distinguishes casual social work from caregiving.
Okay, where's the line?
If your companion helps that 85-year-old stand up from their chair or reminds them to take their medication while they are playing Scrabble, you are no longer a tech platform. You have stepped into heavily monitored, regulated healthcare territory.
And intertwined with that is the classic gig economy battle of our era. Independent contractors versus employees.
Yes. The legal classification of your workforce dictates everything. If they are employees, you have payroll taxes, minimum wage floors, overtime regulations, and benefits obligations.
But if you classify them as independent contractors to save money, you lose the ability to train them or dictate how they do their jobs, which destroys your quality control.
It's a catch-22.
It's exhausting just thinking about the legal bills. And we haven't even touched on the day-to-day operational nightmares. The research points to support and trust as the final hidden costs.
These are the unpredictable variables that will drain a company's resources. Imagine the customer support infrastructure you need.
Like, what do you do when a customer simply doesn't vibe with the companion, says the conversation was boring, and demands a $200 refund?
Or much more seriously, what happens when a companion is in the middle of a dinner session and they text your support hotline saying, "The customer is asking extremely inappropriate questions about my personal life and I feel unsafe."
You can't just put that in a ticketing queue to be answered in 24 hours.
No, you need a highly trained, rapid response crisis team available 24/7.
And then you have the classic marketplace leakage problem, also known as disintermediation. What happens when the customer and the companion genuinely hit it off?
The best case scenario becomes the worst case scenario.
Right. The session ends, they had a great time, and the customer says, "Hey, why are we paying this app a 30% cut every time we hang out? Just text me directly and I'll Venmo you the cash next week."
That destroys the entire business model. If the product is good, the customers are incentivized to leave the platform.
It is the textbook definition of a two-sided trust problem. You have to convince the customer that the companion is real, verified, safe, and professional.
Simultaneously, you have to convince the companion that the customer isn't dangerous.
And you have to convince both of them that your platform is providing enough ongoing value that it's worth paying your 30% tax indefinitely.
It's incredibly difficult to maintain.
It's like running a high-end restaurant. But your ingredients can talk back to you. They can have a bad day or ruin the dish. They can decide to leave the restaurant with the customer, or they can get into a legal dispute with you over their classification. It is incredibly messy because humanity is fundamentally messy.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate question for anyone looking at this space.
Yeah.
With all of these massive hidden costs, the insurance underwriters, the background checks, the legal retainers, the 247 crisis support staff.
Yeah.
Where does the money actually come from? How does this business survive economically?
Let's look at the microeconomics of not being alone. Because the intuitive, obvious answer is, well, you just charge an hourly rate. But the research explicitly calls this the hourly trap.
And it breaks down the math brilliantly to show why pure hourly billing is a death sentence. Let's run the exact numbers they provide.
Let's do it.
Imagine a customer books a companion for a 2-hour coffee date and pays $80 total. That's $40 an hour.
Okay, so $80 comes in. Out of that, you obviously have to pay the companion, otherwise they leave. The text suggests the company pays the companion $50 to keep them happy and engaged.
Right, so the company retains $30 of gross profit. On a spreadsheet, a 37.5% take rate doesn't look terrible until you actually start slicing it up to cover reality.
Let's slice it, because I looked at this and thought, how are they losing money on a 37% margin?
First, subtract 3% right off the top for the credit card processing fee. Then a slice goes to your general liability insurance premiums, which are prorated per session.
Okay, that eats into it.
Then a slice goes to pay the hourly wage of the customer support team you have sitting on standby just in case that coffee date goes wrong. A slice goes to amortizing the $150 background check you ran on that companion 3 months ago.
And the killer, customer acquisition cost. If you spend $40 in Google Ads to get that customer to download the app in the first place, that $30 gross profit is already completely gone.
You're in the red. You have to account for the percentage of sessions that are refunded due to complaints. You have to pay for your server hosting, your administrative overhead, and eventually taxes.
So by the time that initial $80 cascades all the way down to the bottom line, the company is left holding literal pennies, if not operating at a loss.
Relying on hours alone creates a terrible business. It forces you into a high-volume game with razor-thin margins.
But high volume means more human interaction, which means massive compounding liability. So how do you escape the trap? How do you actually build a profitable machine?
The research outlines 3 specific survival mechanisms. The first we already touched on, maximizing customer lifetime value, or LTV.
Right, the subscription model.
Yeah.
Or heavily incentivizing repeat bookings. If the customer pays that $80 once and deletes the app, the marketing cost bankrupted you.
Exactly.
But if you cultivate a relationship where that customer books an $80 session twice a month for 2 years, suddenly the economics flip. The acquisition cost was paid off in month 1, and the rest is recurring margin.
The second survival mechanism is radical specialization. As the text argues, a generic companion is very easy to commoditize, compare, and replace.
Because if you were just selling someone to hang out with, a customer will just shop around for the absolute cheapest hourly rate. It becomes a race to the bottom.
But if you specialize, you gain pricing power.
Tell me more about that.
Imagine marketing a professional event wingman for introverts attending tech conferences alone.
Okay, that's specific.
Or a cultural city guide specifically trained for international corporate visitors, fluent in Mandarin and English. Or a social companion for older adults trained in cognitive engagement activities.
Oh, I see. When you solve a highly specific, painful, high-stakes problem for the customer, it becomes much easier to justify a premium price point of $100 or $150 an hour.
The third solution is the technological moat, algorithmic matching. This is what creates the holy grail of tech platforms' network effects. A truly successful platform doesn't just geolocate the nearest available warm body, it finds the perfect person.
And we need to understand how that actually works. It's not just matching someone who likes tennis with someone else who likes tennis.
No, it's way deeper than that.
A sophisticated algorithm uses natural language processing from the intake forms. It matches conversational pacing. If the customer uses short, direct sentences, the algorithm matches them with a companion who communicates similarly, avoiding the friction of a fast-talking New Yorker being paired with a slow, contemplative listener.
It matches based on introversion versus extroversion scales.
And this is where the flywheel effect takes over, right?
Yeah.
If your matching algorithm is superior, the dates go better. The customers use the service more frequently because they trust the curation.
Exactly. And that high demand attracts a larger pool of high-quality companions who want consistent work.
A larger pool of companions means greater availability and vastly more diverse data profiles.
Which makes the service even more useful to customers, driving more usage, which feeds millions of new data points back into the algorithm on what successful pairings actually look like.
Which makes your matching even better, which drives retention to all-time highs. It is a virtuous, unbreakable cycle once it gets spinning.
I love how the source material grounds all this heavy economic and algorithmic theory in a tangible narrative. They provide a fictional case study of a founder named Alex, and I want some time on this because it reads like a thriller for anyone who has ever tried to start a company.
It really brings the struggles of the human connection industry to life. Let's walk through Alex's journey because it traces the exact evolutionary arc most founders in this space will have to endure.
So Alex is ambitious. Alex launches a rent-a-companion business in a major American city, let's say Chicago.
Okay.
Alex raises a little seed money, builds a beautiful, sleek website, aggressively recruits hundreds of companions, throws up their generic profiles, and launches a massive marketing campaign with the tagline, "Choose your friend."
And immediately, Alex runs face first into the cultural wall we discussed earlier. Alex sits in a coffee shop, watching the analytics dashboard. Customers are clicking the ads, they are showing up to the site.
But they are bouncing right off the page. The conversion rate is abysmal.
Because the proposition is terrifyingly vague. Choose your friend. What does that even mean to a consumer?
Yeah.
Nobody knows exactly what they're putting their credit card down for.
The friction is too high.
If I click book, am I paying for a romantic date? Am I hiring a tour guide? Am I hiring an unlicensed therapist? The cognitive load on the customer to figure out how to use the product is too high, so they just close the tab.
So Alex looks at the dismal data, realizes the generic approach is hemorrhaging cash, and executes the first major pivot: specialization.
Smart move.
Instead of selling the nebulous, mildly shameful concept of buying friends, Alex's company starts selling distinct, tightly packaged experiences.
Alex redesigns the site. Now, instead of a grid of faces, you see specific scenarios. Dinner companion, never eat alone at a nice restaurant again. Event +1, navigate corporate mixers with a charming co-pilot.
New in town navigator, spend Saturday exploring your new neighborhood.
And suddenly, the light bulb goes on for the consumer. The friction is gone. They understand exactly what the product is and what problem it solves. Bookings surge. The company seems to be finding product market fit. Alex is celebrating.
But then Alex hits the invisible structural wall that destroys so many service marketplaces: the utilization problem.
Ah, yes. What the text brilliantly calls the Tuesday morning problem.
The bane of the gig economy. Alex's platform is absolutely slammed on Friday nights, Saturday afternoons, and Sunday brunches. Demand is through the roof.
But on a random Tuesday at 10:00 a.m., crickets. The platform is a ghost town.
Why is that a lethal problem, though? If they're making money on the weekends, who cares about Tuesday?
Because of the inventory. Remember, the inventory is human beings. The highly vetted, premium companions on the platform want predictable, steady, full-time income.
But the customers only want to consume the product during peak leisure hours.
Exactly. If a fantastic companion clears 40 hours of their week to be available on Alex's app, but only actually gets booked for 10 paid hours on the weekend, the math stops working for the companion. They can't pay their rent. So they leave the platform and go get a regular job.
It's the classic supply and demand mismatch. You lose your best supply because you can't keep them busy. So how does Alex survive the Tuesday morning slump? How do you generate demand for human connection on a Wednesday afternoon?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Alex succeeds by executing a second, much more profound pivot. Alex fundamentally shifts the target audience.
Okay, tell me.
Alex stops relying solely on lonely, individual consumers paying out of pocket and pivots aggressively into B2B, business-to-business partnerships.
This was the aha moment in the text for me. Instead of trying to convince one lonely guy to pay for a walk in the park, Alex introduces group experiences and corporate solutions.
Exactly. Alex starts partnering with massive relocation services. When a Fortune 500 company moves a top executive and their spouse from London to Chicago, that executive is highly prone to depression and churn because they are isolated.
So the corporation pays Alex's company a $5,000 retainer to provide vetted, local companions to help the executive's family integrate into the city, find the best grocery stores, and understand the local culture.
Alex partners with high-end event planners who need professional, charming social hosts to seed the crowd and make sure corporate mixers aren't painfully awkward.
The text also mentions senior living communities. A high-end retirement home will pay a massive contract to Alex's agency to provide dedicated activity companions for their residents on Tuesday mornings.
Or universities. A massive state university realizes their freshman dropout rate is spiking due to social isolation. They contract Alex's company to provide peer-to-peer social integration programs.
The genius here is that the buyer doesn't always have to be the lonely individual. The real goldmine is large organizations with massive budgets trying to solve systemic social problems for their populations.
That B2B pivot is what transitions the company from a quirky, struggling rent-a-friend website into a robust, integrated social infrastructure platform.
It's a brilliant move.
But even with that brilliant pivot, the research forces us to look at the cold, hard reality of the numbers. It provides a fascinating, deeply detailed contrast between an optimistic success scenario and a pessimistic downside scenario.
Let's run those numbers because they are incredibly illuminating. In the optimistic scenario, let's say Alex's premium company is operating smoothly with 20 highly active, highly rated companions.
Okay, 20 companions.
Because of the B2B contracts, each of them is pulling in an average of 15 paid hours a week. That's 300 service hours a week across the platform. At our $80 an hour average, that is roughly $24,000 in gross customer spending every single week.
Which annualizes to about $1.2 million in gross bookings. For a boutique 20-person platform, a 7-figure top line sounds amazing.
It sounds like a runaway success until you look at the actual profit and loss statement. Because remember the cascade of hidden costs.
Right.
Over $750,000 of that immediately walks out the door to pay the companions. Then you subtract the 6-figure liability insurance policy, the SaaS subscriptions to run the matching algorithm, the heavy B2B marketing spend, the salaries for the 247 customer support team, the payment processing fees, and the office overhead.
So what's left?
The headline revenue is 7 figures, but the actual operating profit might be a razor-thin sliver of maybe $50,000 to $80,000 a year.
And the terrifying part is that scaling up doesn't necessarily fix the margins. If you try to jump from 20 companions to 100 companions to boost that profit, you realize that scaling human beings isn't like scaling Amazon server space.
Not at all. Recruitment gets exponentially harder.
Maintaining that premium quality control across 100 people is a nightmare. And as the test warns, just one serious safety incident with a single bad companion can generate a headline that permanently destroys the brand.
Which brings us to the pessimistic or perhaps more realistic downside scenario. Suppose you recruit those 20 companions, but you haven't cracked the B2B code. You haven't solved the Tuesday morning problem.
So they're sitting idle.
They are only averaging 5 paid hours a week from consumer weekend bookings. That's a mere 100 service hours platform. platform-wide. If the average rate drops slightly to $70 because you are discounting to attract users, you are only doing about $7,000 a week in gross bookings.
That's only about $364,000 a year gross.
Exactly. And now apply those exact same fixed costs. You still need the expensive insurance, you still need the software, you still need the support team on standby. If you are spending heavily on consumer ads to acquire customers, and the companions take their 60% cut,
The company is doomed.
suddenly the company is not just failing to break even, it is bleeding tens of thousands of dollars a month.
So the ultimate takeaway from Alex's journey is that this business absolutely does not live or die on the hourly rate you charge. You can't just hike the price to $150 an hour to fix your margins, because consumers will just stay home.
Exactly. The business lives or dies on utilization, keeping your inventory busy on Tuesday mornings. It lives on repeat bookings to lower customer acquisition costs. And above all, it lives on maintaining absolute, unshakable trust.
Precisely. If the ecosystem of trust fractures, the model collapses overnight.
But what happens if Alex actually pulls this off? What if the algorithmic matching is perfect, the B2B utilization is high, and the business is thriving?
You suddenly run headfirst into a completely different kind of bankruptcy. Emotional bankruptcy. We need to explore the dark side of this industry, because the research raises a terrifying question. What happens when the product works too well?
This is perhaps the most precarious risk for any founder in this space. It is not a financial risk. It is a profound psychological risk. It is the danger of inadvertently selling and profiting from emotional dependence.
Because you are dealing with vulnerable people. The text paints a very plausible, very concerning picture. A deeply lonely customer tries the service. They find a companion they really connect with. The companion is empathetic. They listen. They validate the customer.
And that's exactly what they're paid to do.
So the customer books them again next week. And then they start booking them twice a week. And suddenly, they are paying to see this same person every single day. The customer starts expecting constant availability, texting them constantly, treating the companion not as a service worker, but as the central pillar of their life.
And on the other side of the transaction, human nature inevitably takes over. The companion, who is being paid to be highly empathetic and present, begins to feel genuinely responsible for the customer's mental health.
The relationship becomes incredibly emotionally enmeshed and complicated.
And blurred by the fact that there is a financial transaction underlying the intimacy. The companion feels trapped.
So if I'm the founder of this company, how exactly do I stop this? How do you write a terms of service for human interaction? You basically have to enforce an emotional boundary, like you may hug for 3 seconds, but no prolonged eye contact.
You can't police human emotions, but the company must establish ironclad structural boundaries. And those boundaries must be built into the very operational DNA of the business model from day one. You cannot figure this out on the fly when a crisis happens.
What do those boundaries actually look like in practice, though?
They have to be explicit, rigorously enforced, and entirely non-negotiable. First, you implement systemic rotation or limits. Perhaps a customer cannot book the same companion more than twice a week. You implement strict cancellation and availability rules so customers can't monopolize a companion's time unpredictably.
You probably need absolute, clear communication policies too, like mandating that all communication, every text, every call, happens only within the monitored app ecosystem, never on personal phone numbers.
Absolutely. You need a zero-tolerance prohibition of any sexual services or romantic advances, clearly stated before the customer ever enters a credit card. Extremely clear procedures for handling harassment.
And perhaps most importantly, you need built-in escalation pathways. If a companion recognizes that a customer is experiencing a genuine mental health crisis or expressing suicidal ideation, there must be a protocol to instantly connect that customer with professional, licensed emergency support, rather than the companion trying to handle it themselves out of guilt.
Because the company is not a psychiatric facility. The companion is not a therapist. They are not a romantic partner. And they are definitely not a substitute for family. The platform has a moral and legal obligation not to exploit the customer's vulnerability by encouraging them to believe otherwise.
Which is exactly why the research makes it a point to emphasize that the Japanese model cannot simply be copy-pasted into America. Japan provides the inspiration and the proof of concept for the logistics. But America's highly litigious, heavily regulated, and culturally distinct environment requires massive adaptation.
And that brings us to the legal ironclad rule for U.S. founders. The text emphasizes that companies in the U.S. must explicitly legally define what they are not doing.
Yes. The messaging must be crystal clear to both the customer, the companion, and the regulators. We provide social presence. We offer no medical advice. We offer no therapy. We offer no handling of customer finances or unauthorized access to private accounts.
Because the moment your companion steps over the line and starts assisting a client with what the law officially designates as activities of daily living.
Things like reminding them to take medication, helping them dress, or driving them to a doctor's appointment.
Exactly. The moment you cross that invisible line, you are no longer a tech platform selling social presence. You have accidentally wandered into the heavily regulated healthcare and caregiving industry.
You are subject to entirely different oversight, massive potential fines, and a level of liability that will bankrupt a startup instantly.
It requires extreme, almost ruthless operational discipline to walk the tightrope of providing genuine, warm, human connection while aggressively policing the cold, legal boundaries of that connection.
It is a phenomenal balancing act. But even if a founder manages to balance the economics, navigate the legal landmines, and maintain perfect emotional boundaries, there is still one massive existential threat looming over the entire industry.
Right. It's 2026. We cannot have a deep dive about a service based on conversation, companionship, and reducing the friction of loneliness without addressing the digital elephant in the room, the ultimate competitor, artificial intelligence.
It is the great disruptor of our era, and its implications for the companionship market are profound.
Look at the sheer overwhelming advantages an AI companion has over a human being from a consumer standpoint.
If I wake up feeling intensely lonely and anxious at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the AI chatbot is instantly there on my phone. It doesn't need me to pay for an Uber to get to my apartment.
It never gets tired. It never has a bad day because it got into a fight with its spouse. It never cancels on me because it caught a cold.
It has perfect, eidetic memory of every preference, fear, and story I've ever shared with it. And comparatively, it costs a fraction of a penny to operate. How on earth does a human companion business, with all its messy hidden costs, compete with that?
If the human business is selling pure conversation, they cannot compete. The AI will win on price, convenience, and availability every single time. It is a race to the bottom that humanity will lose. But that circles back to the very first core premise of the research.
The successful human companion business is not selling conversation.
They are selling access to presence. I was thinking about this while prepping for the deep dive, and the analogy that crystallized it for me is this.
Okay, let's hear it.
An AI companion is like having the world's most attentive, articulate, perfect pen pal. They always write back immediately. They always know exactly the right comforting thing to say. But a human companion is the person actually standing next to you, holding the umbrella over your head in the pouring rain. You simply cannot code the physical reality of an umbrella.
That is a beautiful and incredibly accurate metaphor for the divide between the two technologies. AI can provide the illusion of connection through text, voice, or even generated video. It can stimulate the conversational centers of the brain, but it cannot provide physical, spatial presence.
An AI cannot sit beside you in a leather booth at a crowded, intimidating restaurant, making it look to the rest of the room like you are having an engaging dinner date.
It cannot walk through a museum with you and physically point at a painting, sharing a moment of tangible awe.
It cannot put on a suit, link arms with you, and walk into your cousin's crowded wedding reception so you don't have to face your judgmental family alone.
It can't share a physical cup of coffee across a table. It can't give you the tangible, visceral, biological feeling of entering a room with another living, breathing mammal by your side. Our nervous systems are attuned to physical proximity.
Exactly. And the research points out that current studies into companion chatbots show their effects on human loneliness are incredibly complex. It's not a silver bullet. Some users feel temporary relief, while others feel an even deeper sense of isolation once they put the phone down, realizing the connection wasn't real.
Researchers are increasingly stressing that AI companionship needs to be designed to complement human connection, not replace it entirely.
This raises an important question about the future architecture of this entire industry. The text suggests a fascinating vision for where this is headed, and it's not the dystopian humans versus the machines narrative we usually hear.
Right, the research points toward what they call the synergy model. The future of companionship isn't a binary choice. The most successful, highly valued company in this space won't reject AI. They will integrate it deeply into the operational backend to solve the exact margin problems we discussed earlier.
So AI handles the logistics, and humans handle the presence.
Yes. The AI handles all the grueling, expensive administrative work that ruins the unit economics. The AI acts as the intake coordinator, chatting with the customer to perfectly understand their needs.
The AI runs the complex matching algorithms to pair the perfect human companion with the customer.
The AI handles the 247 customer support, collecting feedback and sending reminders. The AI might even handle the casual between-session text conversations, acting as the consistent, available pen pal to keep the customer engaged with the brand during the week.
But when Friday night rolls around and the customer actually needs a physical +1 to a corporate gala,
The AI steps back, and the human being steps in to deliver the premium physical experience.
Precisely. Technology doesn't replace the human companion. It just strips out all the friction, the scheduling nightmares, and the overhead costs, making the incredibly expensive business model of human companionship radically more efficient and profitable. It allows the humans to focus entirely on being present.
That vision actually makes me highly optimistic.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed from a strange, unsettling push notification on a Friday afternoon through the intricate, fragile economics of human marketplaces. We've navigated the legal minefields of caregiving, the emotional dangers of transactional intimacy, and faced down the AI revolution. Where does this stack of research ultimately leave us?
It leaves us with a very clear synthesis for anyone looking to build, invest in, or even just understand this emerging space. The founder who looks at the Japanese model, builds a generic website, and says to America, "Come rent a friend for $30, is almost certainly going to fail.
The cultural resistance is too high, the trust deficit is insurmountable, and the unit economics will bleed them dry.
But the founder who takes a step back understands the depth of the loneliness epidemic and asks a slightly different, much more targeted question.
What's the question?
What specific high-stakes moments in modern American life become functionally or emotionally easier when another trusted, verified human being is standing beside you? That founder is going to discover dozens of massive, untapped markets.
They will uncover an entirely new sector of the economy hiding in plain sight. Relocation support for executives, senior socialization for aging populations, conference networking for introverted professionals, experiential tourism for solo travelers.
The research even hints at entirely new categories of human interaction that we don't even have cultural names for yet, just waiting to be commodified and solved by the free market.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, the source material lands on a beautiful, if slightly melancholic, core truth about the era we are living in. It points out the incredible, almost tragic irony of our time. Technology, social media, and telecommunications have spent the last 3 decades aggressively trying to connect everyone on the planet. We have more communication tools in our pockets than any generation in human history. We can instantly video chat with someone in Tokyo or text 100 people at once.
Yet, despite all that frictionless digital connection, despite the endless feeds and the AI chatbots, tens of millions of people still feel fundamentally, achingly alone. The next great unicorn business opportunity might not be yet another app that gives people more efficient ways to type at each other across a void. It might be a service that gives them a compelling, structured, safe reason to physically show up in the real world with someone else.
Because some businesses sell physical objects like cars or phones. Some businesses sell convenience like food delivery. Some sell luxury and status like designer clothes. But this business, at its absolute core, sells something much harder to quantify on a balance sheet, but infinitely more valuable to the human soul.
It sells the feeling that even just for a few hours on a Friday night, you are not alone. There is another chair across the table and someone is sitting in it and they are listening to you.
It is a profound realization about what we are actually starving for and what we are ultimately willing to value in the modern economy.
It really is.
And it leaves me with one final, slightly provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. We started this deep dive by comparing this concept to Uber, the frictionless, on-demand, algorithmic solution for physical travel now applied to social presence. But let's follow that logic to its natural conclusion. If paying for a perfectly tailored, reliable, highly empathetic companion becomes as easy, as normalized, and as frictionless as ordering a rideshare to the airport, what happens to our traditional, unpaid friendships?
That is the existential question.
Because, let's be fiercely honest for a second, unpaid, real-world friendships are incredibly messy. They require immense patience. They require us to compromise on what movie to see or where to eat. They force us to deal with conflict, to forgive slights, to listen to our friends complain about the same problems for years. Real friendship requires us to show up for people when it is deeply inconvenient, when we are tired, and when we really don't want to. It is full of friction.
But if the free market eventually allows us to simply bypass all that and buy frictionless, perfectly pleasant, tailored companionship on demand, do we risk losing the emotional muscles required to maintain the difficult, beautiful reality of the real thing? If connection is always easy and perfectly curated, do we forget how to love people who are difficult?
It's the ultimate paradox. By solving the pain of loneliness with a commercial product, we might accidentally cure ourselves of the capacity for genuine, unconditional friendship. Something heavy to think about the next time your phone buzzes on a Friday afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the frontier of human connection. Stay insanely curious, everyone, and as a quick sign-off note from our source material, the contents of this discussion are for educational and trend analysis purposes only. It is not financial, legal, medical, or investment advice. Anyone considering entering this business should conduct independent research and obtain appropriate professional advice for their specific location and services.